All right. Well, thank you for joining us today and welcome to a special Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising webinar focused on capital campaigns for Catholic parishes. I'm Austin Detweiler. I'm the managing editor of Philanthropy Daily, which is hosting this webinar along with the Center for Civil Society. Philanthropy Daily and the Center for Civil Society, or C4CS as you like to call it, they're both projects of American Philanthropic, a strategic consulting firm working with nonprofits across the country in sectors ranging from policy to education and to churches and faith-based nonprofits. And the mission of American Philanthropic is to strengthen America's voluntary associations, those institutions of civil society that form what Robert Nisbet referred to as the sticky space between individuals and government. It's a thriving civil society, we think, that enables not only limited government, but also upholds moral norms in a free society and creates the community where humans, social creatures that we are, can thrive. So two ways that we try to strengthen civil society, in addition to our work with clients, is through Philanthropy Daily and the Center for Civil Society. Philanthropy Daily, you may be aware, is an online journal commenting on philanthropy and civil society and providing useful, actionable advice to fundraisers in order to help them have success and advance their missions. And similarly, the Center for Civil Society provides research, publications, and numerous free and paid online and in-person educational opportunities, just like this one, for fundraisers, nonprofit leaders, and anyone operating in or thinking about civil society, which I must have said a dozen times now. Our goal is to provide these tools to help nonprofits thrive and help them foster healthy communities. While nonprofits of all sorts are key to building a flourishing civil society, but churches play a particularly important role, at least we think so. The Center for Civil Society recently hosted a webinar about the role of Scripture in guiding the modern philanthropist. And I'm sure everyone here today knows how important churches are in community life and in forming moral and generous citizens. And that doesn't even mention the role of the church in our own individual and corporate salvation. But churches also need money to operate. They need buildings to house their liturgies, as St. Augustine reminds us early in the Confessions, and those buildings need to be maintained, they need to be expanded, they need to be rebuilt. It is a burdensome task to keep a church, especially the Catholic Church, where the demographic data for church attendance is fairly troubling, to keep those churches afloat. And not only afloat, but thriving. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with needs at your parish or at neighboring parishes or elsewhere in your diocese. But there's hope. Today, we're joined by two wonderful guests, Conde de Leon and Mike Westcott, who've had a great deal of success raising money for the Catholic Church and the diocese in which they live and pray and work. Before I introduce them, let me just invite everyone to send questions at your convenience. I have several of my own questions to ask Conde and Mike, but let us know what you're wondering and we'll do our best to cover as much as we can today. If you toggle your mouse over the Zoom screen, you'll see a chat box and a Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Send questions in through either of those tools. The questions are visible only to me and the panelists, so don't be shy. Please send them in. With that, let me introduce our guests. Conde de Leon joins us from the Diocese of Phoenix, where he serves as the first Executive Director of Mission Advancement for the diocese. He joined the Office of Mission Advancement in 2016 and today leads a team committed to advancing the mission of Christ through stewardship, evangelization, and discipleship formation. Before taking this position in Phoenix, Conde spent 7 years in the Diocese of Corpus Christi, serving there as the Director of Parish Stewardship and Development, where I was impressed to learn he helped them blow through an $18 million campaign goal, ultimately raising over $37 million for a capital and endowment campaign. So he'll share some of that wisdom with us today, I'm sure. Conde also developed a diocesan-wide parish stewardship program and converted the traditional annual appeal into a catechetical and evangelization opportunity to teach the spirituality of stewardship to every person in the diocese. Conde, I will be asking about that in a few minutes. Clearly, he brings a unique blend of business acumen and ministry experience to his work in the church. Conde also served for 4 years in the Marine Corps. He graduated from Texas A&M in Corpus Christi and earned a Master's of Arts degree at Holy Apostles Seminary and College in Theology for Sacred Scripture. He also recently finished his MBA. Conde and his wife, Rosemary, have been married for 18 years, and they have 4 daughters. Joining Conde is Mike Westcott. He comes to us from the Diocese of Wichita, where he clearly has deep local roots, which you'll hear several times through the bio today. He's been there born and raised there, I think, did college there, now works there. Mike is currently the Director of Development and Planned Giving for the diocese. And prior to joining the diocese, he was the Director of Development for the Capon Mount Carmel High School in the Diocese of Wichita. Before his career in Catholic fundraising, Mike also worked in Catholic healthcare, serving as the Vice President of Support Operations at Via Christi Regional Medical Center in Wichita. Mike has a BS in Sociology, a BA in History from Newman University, again in Wichita, Kansas. Mike and his wife, Therese, have 6 children and 15 grandchildren. And if that family life didn't keep him busy enough, they've been involved in various church ministries for all 42 years of marriage, most actively with Catholic Engaged Encounter and the marriage mentoring program at their parish, Church of the Magdalene in Wichita. Mike's also served 2 3-year terms on the board of directors for the International Catholic Stewardship Conference and is a past president of the Sarah Club for his diocese. Clearly, Conde and Mike are very involved in Catholic life in their diocese, in their parishes, and helping them thrive. Most relevant and timely with our conversation today, Mike and Therese are currently co-chairing the committee for a capital campaign at their own parish. So he's right in the thick of things that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to pass it off to you guys. We'll go back and forth with me asking questions and you telling us how to help the parishes thrive. To get us started, I'd like to hear from both of you your thoughts on Catholic fundraising. There's a bit of a funny reputation as fundraisers for being money grubbers in society today. And there's passages in the Gospels, from the rich young ruler to the money changers in the temple, that lend something of a fraught relationship to money in the Gospels. So how do you guys understand your role as a Catholic fundraiser? Mike, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Austin. So 21 years ago, when I was faced with an opportunity that I accepted to move from healthcare administration into Catholic philanthropy, I was scared to death. I had never done this before, but I was prompted by a very generous woman who later became a mentor and a boss for me, to really deeply pray and give discernment to where I'm being called and what my qualities are, what my skill set is. And one of the things she said is, I can teach you about philanthropy, the technical side of things, but what you have, I can't teach you, and that is people skills, understanding people. So she gave me a great opportunity to start a career, first at a high school here in town, named in honor of a priest of our diocese who died in the Korean War as a prisoner of war, Father Emil Capon. And then I moved on and now have been at the diocese for about 17 years. I love philanthropy. I love fundraising, but I only love it for the church. I could not do it for any other organization. My heart, my passion is not there. And I love being able to engage with others who have that same passion. So on the days when I find that I'm spending too much time in the office and too much on administrative tasks, I have to find a way to engage with people who share that passion. So that's what kind of keeps me going from day to day.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. Conde, tell us about your thoughts as a Catholic fundraiser.
Yeah, well, I guess first I'll just mention for those that are listening, Mike is kind of a legend in Catholic fundraising. He has a wonderful reputation amongst our colleagues. And so Mike, like you, when I first started, about 16 years ago, I was terrified and I really didn't understand or know what I was doing. And I remember going to a conference, and to Catholic fundraisers oftentimes go to an ICSC or International Catholic Stewardship Conference. And I remember seeing Mike as one of the persons that was a senior figure, I guess, somebody that was looked at to and admired. And I just asked myself, like, how in the world does somebody get like that? So, it's like now Mike's my colleague and we're on a webinar together. So I think that's kind of cool. I think one of the things about Catholic fundraising that's unique is that it's, even if you have the technical skills or the people skills, if you don't have a passion for the Lord and for Christ, you're in the wrong place. And I would say somebody shared with me a while back that the church has a way of weeding people out. And the church doesn't necessarily weed them out, but they themselves get weeded out because they realize that they just don't belong. And I think actually that could stay true with just about anything. If your heart is not in it, and if you're not in love with it, and you don't have a passion for it, then you're just not really going to be able to thrive like the way that you could. And so I think that the unique thing about Catholic fundraising is that you're doing something very personal because you're building up the kingdom of God. You're being true to what the Lord is asking you to do, God willing, and you're trying to discern and listen. Now, here's I call this a pro tip, right? My dad used to tell me all the time, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. He told me that all the time. He said, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room, get out. So working for the church, you find yourself surrounded with people that are much better than you. They're much more in tune with their faith. They're much more in tune with their prayer life. They're much more in tune with the Lord. And you just can't help but just admire that and love that and hope that a little bit of it rubs off on you. And then when you finally feel like you're doing a little better in something, then you want to share it, and you want to share it with either your family or your friends. And I think the really cool thing about Catholic fundraising also is that you get to invite other people in, which is evangelization. You're getting to invite people into the mission, and you're a storyteller. And so oftentimes people are like, well, I can't evangelize. Well, people also say that about fundraising. I can't fundraise. It's like, well, yeah, you can probably do both. You just don't know it. And really what you're doing is you're just being authentic and true to yourself, and you're storytelling. And that's really what I've found.
Awesome. So you mentioned, one of the obstacles to being a good parish fundraiser is not liking it or not having a passion for it. That's maybe an internal challenge. What are some external challenges when it comes to parish fundraising?
So since Austin, you mentioned we're in the thick of it at Magdalene, so I might just on my parish, I might just comment a little bit about that. So just this morning, we had a meeting last night with kind of the general chairs and the cabinet chairs, and we got an email this morning that these deliverables are due like the end of this week, and from each of us. And I just thought, wow, this is a lot of work. And so I'm getting to see it from really the inside now. We've participated in parish campaigns in the past, but I'm really getting to see the inside of it. I think one of the biggest challenges that we will face this time around versus maybe 10 years ago when we did our last campaign is that we don't have people back at Mass yet. So I think we're probably doing better than many other parts of the country, but we still have a number of people who are not back at Mass. And if that's our primary way of communicating with people and inspiring people and sharing this vision, then we're going to have to be very creative with other ways of engaging people. So that's probably number one in my mind about as it relates to what our challenge is going to be with this particular campaign.
Yeah, and I think I'll just dovetail on that a little bit, Mike, because one of the external challenges that I see with annual appeals, capital campaigns, and just fundraising in general in parishes is in the past there's a huge reliance on the in-pew participation because that's kind of where you get the most people. But I think we haven't really addressed the behavior of people just in general. People don't carry cash anymore. Those days are over. People don't carry checkbooks anymore. I mean, I'm 45 and I haven't written a check in 15 years. So my kids don't even know what a check is. Okay. So I mean, this is true. Gen Z and millennials they don't even know what that is. What they do know is Venmo. They know Apple Pay. They know cash. What is it? Cash Pay or Cash Out or something like that. You know, there are all these other different methods of how our other generations are giving, and I think the church is still kind of stuck back in this 1970s model of we're passing the bucket wait or the basket waiting for cash, and I think there's something spiritual about everybody putting something in something together. So I'm not that I'm criticizing that, I'm just acknowledging that there's a problem. And I mean, it goes going back to scripture, you know, the widow's mite, when the widow put money into and her talents, and you know, that goes back 2,000 years, right? So like, there's something to be said about doing something communally and putting money in one place and then doing it together, and other people actually watching that happen. I think there's something to be said about that. You know, we give online, but it's taking me literally years to finally stop feeling guilty about not putting anything in the basket. I want to tell everyone, hey, I gave, you know. It's like, that guy works for the church. I get his emails and he's always inviting me for big gifts, and he didn't even put anything in. It's like, no, I did. It's just online. And I'm like, okay, that's my own ego that I got to work through. But the reality is that we've got to get smart about how we're doing things and more intentional. And so we've got to think about that. You know, how we're making it very easy for people to give sitting in the pew, especially our one-time gifts. That's a huge challenge in my mind for external fundraising, external factor.
That makes sense. I like your point too, kind of about not necessarily taking that away, but adding on. One of my colleagues used to use the phrase fundraising by addition rather than fundraising by subtraction. So don't take this thing away and do something else, but you're doing this thing and you can add more on to provide, you know, donors or potential donors more ways to give. Let me follow up with you, Kande, there. I mentioned during your introduction there, the parish stewardship program that you put together. So tell me a little bit about the connection between the annual appeal and how that can be evangelical, and the spirituality of stewardship that you're trying to cultivate through asking for money.
So when I was first hired years ago from the Diocese of Corpus Christi, they wanted somebody to help parishes with parish stewardship. And at the time, I really didn't understand what that meant. I didn't understand stewardship. And I remember telling my pastor, and he's like, "Kind of, what are you talking about? You're a steward." And I'm like, he goes, "You know it, you know stewardship." And I guess I was practicing it and I was living it, but I really didn't understand what that meant. I've never really clearly defined it. So what happened was I started working with pastors and parishes and helping them teach the spirituality of stewardship. The way I learned it was not, I learned that it's a methodology and it's a system. There's a really organized way, an intentional way of how you're able to implement this. And I learned from a priest named Father Andrew Kemberling and Mila Gladova out of Centennial, Colorado at a parish called St. Thomas More. And I went out and I lived with them for a month. And I literally spent 30 days with the masters and learned from them. And they've taught me everything. And I owe much of the good work that we've been able to do to them as my mentors that have helped me to this day. So anyway, went back and I started implementing that, and parishes just saw tremendous success. I think the link is, Austin, to, like you were talking about, the annual appeal. Really the link is we're building conversion in people. So, I mean, the whole idea of stewardship is not just time, talent, and treasure, but the whole idea is changing the way people think and understanding that everything that I have doesn't belong to me, it belongs to God. So it's a catechetical moment. And what we're doing is we're building disciples. We're building, as the pastoral letter would say, we're building mature disciples, where they're making an intentional, conscious way to, like, say, I want to do what is good and pleasing to God. I want to give everything to God and not just something. So people say all the time, it's like, well, how do we get up to 10%? It's like, well, to be quite honest, God doesn't really want the 10%. He wants 100%. He wants it all. And I mean, it's because it's an entire mentality and framework. So if we can teach people this, then what happens is the other ways that we raise money become very easy. So let me give you a real practical example. So you mentioned, Austin, in the introduction, you said, Conde, your goal was 18.5 million, ended up raising 38 million over at Corpus Christi. Like that's impressive. That's great. Well, I can't really take credit for that in the sense that that wasn't on purpose. So here's the backstory to that. Okay. So I worked in parishes for about 2 years building relationships with pastors. And I spent a lot of time, because that was my job, building relationships with pastors and helping them with stewardship. And what that did was build a huge amount of credibility. And so when the campaign came, anybody that's ever run a diocesan campaign, they know the biggest challenge you're going to have is how you're getting all the pastors to participate at maximum participation. That's the biggest challenge. Well, we had already laid out that groundwork for 2 years, where we spent time just talking about the spirituality of stewardship, and we spent building a relationship where they knew that we cared about them. So when the campaign came, it was a very natural process. So I had cultivated those relationships and worked with those pastors to help their people. So when the campaign came, it was, I think, that 38 million or 37 million, it was 37.8 or something like that. That was a byproduct of teaching the spirituality of stewardship.
Thank you. So you're leading into going from sort of laying the groundwork there and then going into a campaign. Say on the parish level, let's lean towards campaigns a little bigger in the conversation. When should a parish begin considering a campaign, or when does a parish know they're ready to do a capital campaign? Mike, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So in my mind, there's two pivotal moments in the discernment process when parish leadership might say we should consider a campaign. First of all, there are clearly identified needs in the parish that are not able to be addressed through ordinary giving. And certainly there's a component of the current campaign that we're involved with at my parish that there is maintenance that needs to be done. But we are diocesan wide, and particularly at my own parish, we're really trying to focus a movement from maintenance to mission. So that would be the other pivotal part of a discernment, is where do we go to be missionary disciples? What do we need to be doing in our parish that will provide opportunities to build Christian disciples? So my pastor is Father John Yurok. He is on fire with this stuff. And he really is beginning to change the definition, or maybe the way we go about stewardship, if you will, because in our definition of stewardship, it's the grateful response of a Christian disciple. So you can't respond until you are that Christian disciple. So he's kind of doing, in my mind, the long game on this. And he's saying we have to evangelize, we have to build disciples. And when we have disciples of Christ, they will want to respond in the appropriate way. So we have a maintenance mission to a maintenance component to our campaign, but we have a mission or a vision component. And actually we're going to build what Father Yurok calls is our missionary discipleship center. So this is going to be an area where small faith sharing groups can come and discuss their faith, do book studies, those kinds of things. It's going to be a cool kind of family environment, not our institutional churches with cinder block walls and that kind of stuff. It's going to be a very inviting space. So to get to your question, Austin, if there's needs, if there's maintenance, and if there's mission, consider, and you can't meet it by ordinary income, then a campaign it challenges us all to step up to the plate and be a part of something bigger.
Did you want to add anything to that, Conde?
No, I think that's a good, I think that's a good example. I think one thing oftentimes we'll get calls from is offertory's down, and then the air condition breaks, right? Or the roof is leaking. And so all of a sudden they need to get this real practical thing fixed, and they don't have the resources to do it. So, you know, I think the key is not to get people into a transactional mindset where it's like, okay, we're going to give, but the pastor may, because they're just, they might be under pressure or in a panic situation. Because listen, in Arizona in the summer, if the AC breaks, that is a safety concern. I mean,
Yeah.
it's 120 degrees out here. I mean, like the people will get hurt. So, I mean, there's some real practical things about this, and they're trying to figure out like, how do we pay for it? I think the key is to do exactly what Mike said, is how do we take this and then how do we possibly package it with something much bigger that talks about not the air conditioner and the roof, but talks about how this is our place where we come to know Jesus. This is our place where we go and approach the Lord together and go into a mission mindset. So it's all how you tell the story.
That's great. When it's common in university campaigns or hospital campaigns to have a quiet phase. Is a quiet phase important with the parish campaign, or should you just go right into promoting the campaign through the bulletin, through the pulpit, through emails?
Conde, do you want to start on that one?
I was just going to say, yeah, I think that, yeah, some will call it a quiet phase, silent phase, a major gifts phase. You know, what I would just say is that part of a successful campaign, it's all about momentum. It's all about momentum. So you're trying to build up this momentum and this energy so that when you go to the parishioners, you've already established credibility based on this momentum. And then what happens is people want to be a part of it. That's one reason. Here's another reason. Some pastors will say, no, I'm just going to ask everybody for $100. Every family is going to give it. Well, that doesn't work. And scripturally that doesn't work because I mean, it tells us right in the Bible that everybody has different gifts and everybody has different parts, and those things cannot be the same. But oftentimes that's what we try to do because it's a quick fix. But the reality is that that there's a uniqueness even in our own giving. So we're trying to build up this momentum. The other practical thing is this, is if you go and just invite everybody, you might have somebody that has capacity to pay for 50% of it, and they want to. But because you've already messaged this as we want everybody to give $100, or here are your options, 25, 50, 100, 200, or if you just say give what you can, then you're not really being strategic about it. But the spiritual side of it is you're not also utilizing the gifts that God's given you, which is the people to help to be a part of it. And you're not giving them an opportunity to give sacrificially, because there's people that want to do that. I mean, they want to do that. They want to help. Mike? I
might just piggyback on what Conde said. You know, we at the parish, we will have a major gift phase, if you will, but basically that's just leadership. So the people that we are training from the parish to be solicitors for our parish campaign, they'll make their gifts first. And so we're in that process now, and that's going to be about a 30-day process. And then we kick it off towards the end of July with, if you will, the public face. But our parish is very aware of what's going on right now and are very much a part of making all this happen. We, to the best of our abilities, we do use specific ask amounts because, as Conde said, everybody has different abilities to give at different levels. And there's nothing wrong with that conversation, that invitation to have them consider at a higher level. So you can't do that with everybody, but the more you can do it with, I think the more fulfilling and the more successful the campaign will be.
So that's perfect. Follow to the next question, which kind of has two parts. So you mentioned, Mike, specific ask amounts. How do you determine specific ask amounts for parishioners? And do you guys have tips or recommendations on how to approach, you know, some of the bigger donors who might, like Conde said, be a 50% of the campaign goal or 30% of the campaign goal? Mike, how about you start with how to set those ask amounts?
Right. So this is fresh on my mind because we just talked about this last night at our meeting. So we look at ordinary giving. So how much are our parishioners giving Sunday by Sunday, month by month? We look at maybe what they gave at the last campaign. And then we don't do this so much at the parish level. We probably do this more at the diocesan level. We might do a little bit more research into other places where they may have made gifts, substantial gifts that those could have been reported. You can find all kinds of information about people. But basically, the other piece is we also look at what they might have identified to us when we did our feasibility study. So sometimes people will give a range that they would consider giving for a particular project. So all of those combined together, we come up as a group, our chairs. We look at, we'll probably look at about 450 of our parishioners will have ask amounts. We're a 1,500 member parish. So about a fourth of our parish will have specific ask amounts for.
Good. Conde, do you have any thoughts on how to approach some of those bigger prospects who you want to have make lead gifts to the campaign, especially maybe if it doesn't line up with their offertory giving every year, but there's, you know, indicated capacity, like Mike said?
Yeah, I think I think there's a couple of things that, first of all, you need to understand what the need is. And so, because that is going to be proportionate to what the invitation amount is going to be set at. So what is the overall need? I think the other things Mike's hit on just exactly right. Understanding what does their regular giving look like? What other things have they given to? There's you'd be surprised what happens if you Google somebody's name and just like what happens. So I think there's some research that, and there's certainly software and tools that I wouldn't advise parishes go into that, but certainly development shops that are raising a considerable amount of money might want to consider investing in those kind of software. But I think the other thing is keeping it basic is look at three things. I think the first thing you want to look at is what is their capacity to give. So trying to understand like a little bit about their past philanthropy, what kind of income you think that they might have coming in, just understanding some basic things. I think the second thing is understanding what your relationship is with the person. If you don't have a relationship with the person, I don't care if they're multi-millionaire, you probably don't want to approach that person on the first visit and invite them to make a gift. And I see that done all the time. So I think the third thing that you want to look at is what is their affinity to the project. So do they even care about it? So look at capacity to give, look at relationship, and look at engagement.
Mike, you mentioned the feasibility study phase. How important is a feasibility study for a parish campaign?
It is, in my opinion, it's an absolute. You cannot move into a campaign unless you have thoroughly conducted an appropriate feasibility study conducted by a third party, campaign counsel. So now I'm going to have to say we have a parish here in town who successfully ran a full campaign, exceeded their goal, and did not use a feasibility study nor campaign counsel. That is a rarity in my mind. So feasibility study helps you understand the temperature of the people that you're going to be asking, their capacity, and also their inclination to support the projects. So we had I think maybe 6 aspects to our parish campaign, and one got a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of 8. One got a rating of 4, one got a rating of 1.7. So we're not going to build that bell tower because nobody wants a bell tower at our parish. So you find all this out during feasibility study, but also what Conde said about momentum, it begins to build the momentum for the project and the excitement that this is coming. And sometimes I think as fundraisers, we're like, no, we want to sneak up on people. We don't want to give them any lead on this because maybe they'll, hide their wallets or something. But people want to know what's going on, and you need to be transparent and say, we want to inspire you to make a gift here.
So it sounds like a feasibility study gives you insight into what you can achieve in the campaign in terms of amount, but also what you should try and do. You'll learn from your parishioners what they're interested in and what they don't want to do. And then the third thing you mentioned, Mike, it gets the ball rolling. It sort of starts the process for a successful campaign.
Exactly.
Any general thoughts on how many people to interview for a feasibility study? Are there lots of them? Is it just a few? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you're trying to raise. I think it depends on how many, what it looks like on a diocesan level is going to probably look much different than on a parish level. It could look much different in a nonprofit. And it could look, yeah, it's just going to vary. So I would say that a good sweet spot is about 40 to 50 major donors, what we would call. But you certainly want to understand the constituency. So I would just say if I was a pastor or if I was advising a pastor, I'd say, let's look at your top 50 givers and let's look at that. I think the other thing that you also want to look at when interviewing on a feasibility study is other key stakeholders. So what other people that are influencers or leaders, because that is a part of the process too. And although they may not be giving $1 million gift, if they're not on board, they could sabotage the entire effort. So you want to make sure that they are asked the questions.
Can you give me an example of who some of those stakeholders would be?
So let's say the pastor decides he wants to build a youth center, right? And he thinks it's important to build a youth center, and the youth director doesn't want it. The youth director doesn't want it. The youth director wants to just work out of the hall. That's a problem. So, I mean, that would be an easy one. Here's another one. We need to do a parish office, and all the parish staff says, "Thank you. We need a parish office, but we're going to have to knock down a tree in the parish in order to do it." Well, if they're founding members of that parish that built that parish and they have that tree up, you'd be surprised. I mean, although it's very practical and they could probably raise the money, you're going to have some of your founding members that are going to be raising complete havoc because you've got to knock down a tree that they remember building when they were or planning when they were little kids. So that's what I mean by key stakeholders.
Hey, Austin, I might just weigh in on one more aspect here, and that is a feasibility study. If you go into it with the right mindset, it's not a fait accompli that you'll do a campaign. So we are considering a diocesan campaign, and I just spent 3 hours yesterday afternoon with 54 of our priests, trying to convince them that we've not made this decision yet, which is true. We want to listen to what they have to tell us. And I think we were successful in communicating that message. But I just worked with one of our high schools recently. In fact, we're in the midst of it right now, where we had a third party come in, conduct a feasibility study. And at least at this point in time, the consultant is saying you should not proceed. You do not have the momentum, you do not have the buy-in of the people, and you don't have the capacity to do your project. So we've kind of asked the consultant to go back and talk with a few more people to see if she could pan out some more support or if her opinion would change. But you got to enter this thinking this is just the first step. If we come back with some successful results, then we'll move towards campaign.
What can you do if you do need to invest in repairs or updates and the feasibility study comes back negative? What can we do to start raising some money or increase offertory?
Well, I think that's going to vary per situation. So it's I think there's different strategies depending on the situation, but I think one of the first things I'd look at is just our offertory and what does our stewardship look like right now. And then I think the other thing you could look at is reaching out to some key donors and sitting down with them and inviting them to make a gift to help it. So I think just in a major gift space, just reaching out to some key people and talking to them and inviting them to help make a gift that would assist the church in its time of need.
So if you're not ready for a full-on capital campaign, maybe a more modest goal through a targeted sort of major gifts approach to a few parishioners and donors. Does that sound right? Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to add, I agree with everything Conde just said. You know, you could look at different strategies for assisting in that particular project. But we had, unfortunately, we had one of our high schools that their HVAC system died. I mean, it was a 1960s build, and it was it could not be resurrected. And so they had to put $5 million into a new HVAC system for the high school, and they had no choice. They had to do this. So, the diocese gives them a loan to kind of float until they can do their campaign. They did a feasibility study. There's no way they could raise $5 million, but that didn't mean that they couldn't raise something. So they went ahead and did the campaign, and they raised $3 million. That means they've got 2 million they're going to be paying off for a few years. But the feasibility study really helped set the tone for that. So in addition to talking to your key supporters for a major gift, doesn't, just because you don't have a positive feasibility study doesn't mean you can't proceed forward.
Mm-hmm. Me pivot slightly. How do you coach pastors about the importance of fundraising, especially the ones that are sort of reluctant to lean into fundraising? I'm sure you work with a lot of pastors. Well, both of you, Mike, you just mentioned having 53 in a room together.
Yeah, well, I would tell you, I think the first thing is you have to talk their language. And so if you're starting off a conversation with a pastor about fundraising, I think that the connotative meaning with fundraising in a Catholic church is a transactional mentality, and they may not even recognize that that's what's happening, but there is. So I think you have to talk their language, and I think the first thing you have to talk about is forming disciples and sacrificial giving, because the reality of it is, and Mike, you kind of alluded this earlier when you were talking about your pastor and his model is, listen, if we have well-formed disciples, then every disciple wants to see the mission fulfilled. So when you talk to a pastor, what we're really talking to them about is what they're passionate about. And what they're passionate about is their vocation. Otherwise, why are they a priest? So we talk to them about their vocation. Oftentimes when I meet with a pastor, one of the things, especially if I don't know him, is I'll ask him about his conversion story. I'll ask him about how he went into seminary, how he knew he was being called to become a priest. Because I think what you'll find is, first of all, pastors love talking about their story, because it's like their love story. If you asked a married couple about, kids do this all the time, mom, dad, how did you all meet? They go back to that one moment in time. And I know I certainly do it with my relationship with the Lord. Whenever things get tough, I go back to that moment where I knew that God was calling me. And I say, okay, it's going to be okay. The Lord is calling me. You're not crazy. It's going to work out. And I think that's what we have to do with pastors on something like this, and help remind them, because, the reality is that pastors are in the thick of it. Okay. They're understaffed, they're underfunded, they're enormous amount of stress. They haven't gone to school for this. And they have these high expectations from their parishioners. They have high expectations from the bishop, and they have high expectations on themselves oftentimes. So you got to talk their language. You've got to be able to talk their language and understand and be able to convert it to what we're doing is we're building disciples, we're building conversion, we're building opportunities for people to fall more in love with the Lord, to be sacrificial. Mike, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I just might add on to what you said, Conde, that I think the biggest emotion that comes across when you start to talk about, especially new pastors, is just fear. It's fear of asking, because for most of our ordinary gifts, Sunday gifts, maybe we're suggesting a percentage, but we're not really putting a number out there for them. So I will tell you that that's where we're going to spend some time with our recently ordained pastors that are out there 4, 5, 6 years, is really helping them understand, taking that fear element away. Our bishop, Bishop Carl Kimmy, came from a diocese in Springfield, Illinois, as he was a pastor there. He said he was scared to death when he had to make that first ask at a parish many, many years ago. But after he got into the family's home and they began just having this wonderful conversation, and they stepped forward with a gift much larger than he was even going to ask for, because of the relationship that he had built with them and the trust that they had in him. And this can happen with pastor after pastor after pastor, but getting to that first point is really difficult.
How does a parish balance a lot of different needs at the same time? So you have your Sunday offertory revenue, annual appeal, so to speak. You might be running a capital campaign, and then sometimes the diocese is running a campaign too with parish contributions. How do you weigh all these different needs and navigate that?
like as a pastor, like how would a pastor navigate and having to do all of that?
I think it would say either pastor, somebody, if there's a director of development or executive director at a parish, or if you're supporting a pastor, or finance council, maybe.
Well, I think one of the things to think about is that we have a God of abundance and not scarcity. I think that's the one big thing. So first of all, we have to have that mentality that we have a God of abundance and not scarcity. Number two, we can't make decisions for other people. Okay, that's not okay. I mean, that's because now we're messing with their free will. Okay, so our job is not to make a decision for somebody. Our job is to invite somebody. And we need to trust that they and the Holy Spirit are going to be able to discern whether that, or they with the Holy Spirit will be able to discern whether they're going to participate or not. So I think that's another thing. Now that's just one aspect. I mean, there is the reality that there are a bunch of things that a priest may need to discern and what to invite. So what I'm not suggesting is that they just have a free for all and ask. I've worked with some parishes that have 64 collections, second collections, 64. We have 52 weeks in a year. We got 64 second collections planned. So I mean, like I think there's some common sense to a lot of this. But what I think happens sometimes, it's like, well, we don't want our people to give to the annual appeal, because if they give the annual appeal, they're not going to give to the offertory. Well, that's not true. We don't want them to give to a capital campaign for the diocese, because then they're not going to give to the offertory. And if we're going to give to the capital campaign, you should not do an annual appeal. That's not fair. So, but we have to recognize, and this is where understanding what cases for support is, and that there's clearly defined cases of support, and that they're clearly articulated in messages to the parishioners. So I think that's the other thing that we have to think about. I mean, I could go on about this. Mike, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I would just jump in and say it's all a balance. And as we approach people about a gift, we need to talk about above and beyond what you're currently doing. That's the expectation. We can't stop someone from saying, yes, I'll make that gift, and then just discreetly, or not so discreetly, taking it from their ordinary giving and putting it over here. But when we sit down with our donors, when we publish our literature, we talk about above and beyond for a parish campaign now. So I'm not talking about stopping your ordinary giving, because we need that to sustain the operations, but about asking you to do something more than that. I think that's really critical. We, in the Diocese of Wichita, we really have a pretty simple formula here. We challenge people to give 8% to their parish and 2% to other ministries. Of course, my job at the diocese is to talk them into diocesan ministries that are supported, at the larger level of the church. So we don't do an annual appeal, so we don't have a lot of competition back and forth between the parishes and the diocese on the collection of those kind of funds.
Just to clarify, Mike, are you saying that communication to parishioners should explicitly say, we're looking for you to go above and beyond, regulate, like out loud say that?
Yes, I think you have to be really clear and transparent here. And set the expectation. We're not trying to set the bar low. We're trying to set the bar high. People will come to that bar, but we don't want them just to move it from one pot to another.
If you're not in a campaign, should pastors send fundraising letters home to parishes? What do you think, Kande?
Well, I think it goes back to the language, Austin. So I do think that they need to invite, but I think they need to do it strategically and thoughtful in terms of when and how. So if the only time I get a letter from my pastor is asking me for money, there's a problem. So what you need to think about is, how are they messaging with their parishioners all year? So then it becomes very natural. So I think that there's a series of pieces to that, but I do think that a pastor should definitely invite their parishioners by direct mail. I think that's very effective in fundraising. But I think that they've got to look at it strategically. And I think they got to look at it from, how are we helping them being better stewards and being better disciples?
So you're saying I should hear from my pastor more than just Sunday morning for an hour or so?
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that pastors don't do enough of is communicate with their parishioners outside of Sunday Mass. So, my pastor back when it was one of my mentors, what he used to do is in the bulletin, he would put a picture of himself. I mean, we all know who our pastor is, didn't matter. He put a picture of himself, and then he wrote a new letter every week. It wasn't a canned letter. It was a very personal letter. And it wasn't evangelizing to us in the sense like telling us about what we should and shouldn't be doing. It was telling us about his life, and it was telling us about his journey and what he did and lessons he learned from the Holy Spirit along the way. And it was through these stories of listening about our pastor's life that we felt connected to him, and that he was witnessing, he was evangelizing to us without even directly doing it. Isn't that what Jesus did? Like he was a master at that.
Yeah, right.
So I think if our pastor back in the day, if we were utilizing email like today, he would have been doing it electronically. So I think, pastors need to look at how they're communicating. And then going back to your question, Austin, how do we invite people to give gifts? Absolutely. But it's got to be strategic in the overall sense.
So Austin, our pastor does weekly videos that he posts on Facebook.
Wow.
And on our parish website. And they're 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes. Sometimes he's interviewing somebody else, maybe an associate pastor. Sometimes he's interviewing the school principal. Sometimes it's just him in front of one of our statues talking about the gift of Mary Magdalene to, the risen Christ. So, but every week he's out there in front of people, and it's not just on Sundays.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like about that a lot is it's building relationships, even if you're not in everybody's living room with them. One of the things you mentioned earlier, Kande, about making those bigger asks is that it's got to be preceded by relationship. And one of the things that's interesting about fundraising is oftentimes the specific tactics are different based on giving level. Like you might only go to the living room of so many people, but at the end of the day, the sort of like principles are the same. It's based on a relationship, and you need to find a way to create a relationship with a lot more people all at the same time.
Yeah.
I have a couple more questions here I want to get to. We're running low on time. Here's a good one, and I know, Mike, you have a good answer for this. Are there any books that you would recommend on Catholic fundraising or parish fundraising that anybody here might be interested in?
Yeah, there's some great books out there, but one of the books that our parish cabinet is reading right now as the first 15 minutes of every meeting, it's kind of a formation moment, is Henry Nouwen's Spirituality of Fundraising. It's a small little green book. I just ordered 15 of them. It costs $7.99, and it is a quick read. You can read it in 45 minutes, but we're reading it, and then we're talking about our observations. And this is the leadership group. So it's my go-to book. I go back to it every once in a while and reread it because it gives me confidence in what I'm doing.
That's great. Kande, do you have any other key recommendations, books or articles?
Well, I have 3. I think the first one is Making Stewardship a Way of Life by Father Andrew Kemberling and Mila Glodova. Anyone within parish stewardship should have this book. It's like $35, but I mean, it literally lays out the blueprint, and it talks about the spirituality. I think it's one of the best, most practical books out there. Any pastor should have that on their shelf. The second one is by Charles Zeck, called Why Catholics Don't Give. Excellent book, talking about why, there's oftentimes pastors think they can't afford to give something. He talks about relationships, he talks about engagement. And it's interesting because he does a survey on all denominations. It's been a while since I read that book, so I'm going by memory, but I would say it was something like 1.2 Catholics that give 1.2% of their income. That's what they give of their income. Catholics in general, those are the Catholics that give. Catholics in general, it's like 0.7%. So, listen, I mean, parishes could literally triple their offertory if they were to teach stewardship and just get more involved and just get them up to 4% or 5%. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, just a little plug, because I have to, The Heart of the Mission, Simple Ways to Bring People to Jesus, the book I wrote. I will share with you, I believe in this book because it doesn't talk about fundraising at all, actually. It talks about relationships, and it talks directly about how to build a relationship with Jesus in your everyday life and how you see relationships with other people. So stewardship, discipleship, evangelization. I think it's practical, it's inexpensive, and I think it's a quick read.
Well, thank you, Kande and Mike, very much for all of your time today. I really appreciate this. I found it very helpful. I hope everybody listening here and listening later find it just as helpful. If I can add one thing about it, and then I'll give you both final remarks, but maybe you can comment on this. It strikes me that oftentimes churches and pastors and parishes are afraid to ask for money because they don't want to seem like they're falling victim to love of money or like asking for too much. But Kanda, you made this great point. God doesn't want 10%, he wants 100%. And one of the things you do when you ask for money is you give people a chance not to love their money, but to love God and to love the church. And you're giving them a chance to be sacrificial and to be disciples of Christ. And that's really what this is all about, which is quite beautiful. Thank you. I want to mention 3 things, upcoming dates, but let me give you guys any final comments or remarks you want to make about parish fundraising or Catholic fundraising. Any last words, Mike?
Yeah, and I just want to comment on something that Conde said, because I think it made so much sense. Don't assume that you know how a person is going to respond to an ask or an invitation. Just without fear, express that invitation to them and then sit back and let them converse with you. Don't assume that you know what they can and can't do or will or won't do.
Great. Conde,
Yeah,
any final comments?
Yeah, I'd say to anybody that's going out into the deep, particularly pastors, lay leaders, and are a little nervous or afraid, but they do feel that there's a worthy cause, and they do feel that there's a need, and they do feel that they're in this situation, whether they want it to be or not, and they find themselves either in a leadership role or having to invite people to make gifts or whatever with regard to fundraising. I would just offer you my personal prayer, which is Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all that you do, and he will direct your path. And if just really lean on the Lord to help you. Remember, it's his money, it's his needs. You are literally just somebody that's like making things happen because he's telling you to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, guys. We will send an email after this with the books that were recommended, with links to them in case anybody's interested in ordering those and following up. They are all great recommendations. I just want to plug a few things that we've got coming up. As I mentioned, we do a lot of free online content. We have some paid online trainings and in-person trainings coming up in June and July. We've got a masterclass on grant writing. It's a 3-hour online class with a small group to talk about grant writing. Another 3 hours on direct mail. So if you're working on direct mail, if you're interested in how to do that and scale up mail and digital, you can sign up there. And then we have what we call our Scotch Talk. These are casual online webinars. You can grab a drink and kick back and talk about fundraising. We'll be talking about digital direct response on June 23rd. And finally, we have an in-person training in Denver in July. These are elements of fundraising training. It's a 2-day training on basically a comprehensive look into fundraising. You can find all of that at AmericanPhilanthropic.com on our events tab. Conde, Mike, thank you again very much for joining us. This was extremely helpful. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thank you.